And we're already hearing a lot of commotions on the Republican side in terms of who intends to run for president, like Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, Ron DeSantis, no need to introduce him, former Vice President Mike Pence, and of course, the star, former President Donald Trump. And then on the Democrat side, we got Robert F. Kennedy, Marianne Wilson, and President Biden. To me, on the Democrat side, it seems like there's no serious challengers to Biden so far. Whereas on the Republican side, they're pretty much all hard hitters. So I wanted to get your take on the people who are throwing their hat in the ring for the upcoming election.
That's a great intro question. So for the Republicans, they don't have an incumbent president. The incumbent president's a Democrat, Joe Biden. But Donald Trump is the past president of the United States who lost the election in 2020. And so in some ways, he's still the incumbent. So he's the person that you have to defeat in the primary. The difference is that primaries are held state by state. There are different rules to allocate the delegates in the primaries. So the Republicans have a hybrid system. The beginning, let's say January, Iowa caucuses are now January 15th, 2024. January to March, it's proportional representation so that, whatever percentage of the votes you get in the state, you get a corresponding percentage of delegates to the Republican convention. After March, the end of March, give or take, it becomes winner take all. And so the Republicans basically have the most contested competitive states are proportional representation. And once you get past March, most of those states are either totally blue or totally red. So the reason they like proportional representation or that they switched to that system some years ago is to generate turnout, to generate excitement, to generate competition. Because when you have competition in the primary, you have more people signing up to vote, registering as Republicans and voting. And once you vote and you know your polling place, you are very likely to vote in the general election.
Right.
So a contested primary, it used to believe a contested primary was bad for a party. But, if there isn't an incumbent in the office of president, it's actually good for a party because it generates interest. And that's where I see the Republicans benefiting from a larger field, including, of course, also Tim Scott, senator from South Carolina.
Can't forget about him.
So Nikki Haley is the former governor of South Carolina. Tim Scott's one of the two sitting senators from North Carolina. And it's going to be a very interesting campaign for Tim Scott. He's, 57. He's just about the same age, I think, or a little older than Nikki Haley, older than Ron DeSantis, but younger than Mike Pence and younger than Donald Trump. So it's going to be interesting how that goes. And also he's African-American. And, what's the receptivity in the Republican Party to an African-American candidate?
Yeah.
On the Democratic side, primary challenges rarely work to deny the incumbent the nomination, but they can damage an incumbent.
Right.
So two really high-profile cases of that was Jimmy Carter in 1980 when Senator Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts challenged him. That looked a little bit like Bernie Sanders against Hillary Clinton in 2016. And Carter got the nomination, but he was damaged.
Right.
And then more damaging, I think, was in 1992 when Patrick Buchanan challenged incumbent President George Herbert Walker Bush, we call it Bush 1, and, raised very important issues like trade and the impact of open trade well before it became a big issue, and other things like taxes. And so that, ginned up some opposition to Bush in the Republican Party. And the people who really liked Pat Buchanan stayed home in 1992. And that was part of the reason that the incumbent president lost the election.
So let's go back a little bit. You mentioned state-by-state elections in the beginning. Can you elaborate a little bit for our audience what that means for voters and what this should be taken into consideration?
So right now, when you're looking at national polls of national Republicans, Donald Trump has about a 17-point advantage on Ron DeSantis.
Right.
But that's national, not state by state. So Ron DeSantis is now actively campaigning in places like New Hampshire, places like Iowa, places like South Carolina, and Florida. He's already got. You would expect Ron DeSantis to win Florida pretty easily in that primary because he's so popular there among Republicans. And what that means is if Iowa caucuses go first, and let's say Ron DeSantis wins Iowa, and then we have New Hampshire primary and he wins that primary, even though the number of delegates may not be that large, there's momentum that builds. So really looking at state polling is much more reflective
of what is happening.
Of what the chances of somebody getting the nomination than the national polling.
Okay, so the Republican camp seems a lot more exciting right now in terms of everything that's going on. Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley are basically have like the Donald Trump brand behind them. Ron DeSantis specifically, because he was Donald Trump's guy. But like you said in one of your interviews, he doesn't come with the baggage that Donald Trump comes with. Whereas Tim Scott, what do we make of him? He's the new interesting guy on the block. In the sense that like he's not a white person, he's black, and then he's like discusses this whole unity thing in his own version, whether we agree with the way he's doing it or not. So then, are there any real challenges to the Republican incumbent in a sense? How can they make themselves seem to the Republican Party as like we are a better alternative to Donald Trump? Because I'm not trying to discount Nikki Haley or Mike Pence, but right now it seems like Team Scott and Ron DeSantis are the ones that, like, to me personally, have like any real chance of standing against Donald Trump, because the Republican Party, many would argue, are right now in its popular side in the pockets of Donald Trump.
Well, I actually think that Donald Trump has about, from at least 2016, and he was incumbent in 2020, but 2016, he never really got more than 34% of the vote in the primaries in the Republican Party. It veered from 28% to 34%. You need, with a few challengers, you can't win that way, right? You need, somebody else, one or two challengers can defeat you. But if there's lots of people running on the ballot, and we don't know that they'll all be on the ballot, they have to file pretty much by December 31st, 2023, and then we'll know who's really going to be on the ballot in these primaries. So Mike Pence, for example, the former vice president, is really trying to appeal to the evangelicals.
Right.
And this is the big puzzle, I think, that everybody looks at, political observers look at, that evangelicals have really firm beliefs about extramarital affairs, about divorce, about abortion, about gay rights, and they are firm in those beliefs. And Donald Trump is the least committed to the conservative agenda in those issues of all the candidates running. And yet they still flock to him. And so this is the big nut to crack for Mike Pence to say, listen, I'm the one who's a true believer. And the same for Tim Scott. Tim Scott can say, I practice what I preach. I have the same moral values, if not stronger, more deeply felt. And I am younger and I have no baggage. Right. And in the end, it's sort of, how do you appeal to those evangelicals? About 24% of the electorate, and just below a majority of the white electorate. So they're very powerful in elections. And yet their positions don't seem to accord with certainly Donald Trump's. And, at some point you have to defend your vote to yourself. And that's what the opponents of Donald Trump are counting on. That in the end, a man who's on trial, or has been convicted of defamation, on trial for, mishandling of documents, possibly going to be on trial for electoral interference, possibly on trial for inciting violence on January 6th. After a while, are you still able to justify your vote for this person? Right. And whittling away at that core is exactly what particularly Tim Scott wants to do and Mike Pence wants to do.
But then the major question is, do the people on the right, the voter base, care at all?